My name is Alina Moreau. I'm 36, and I've spent more than half my life inside the quiet chaos of ateliers where silk breathes, scissors sing, and perfection is measured in millimeters. I came from Marseille, from a family of tailors who believed that fabric has memory. If you mistreat it once, it will never lie flat again. I suppose people are the same. That morning, the studio pulsed with tension. The Paris show was in 2 days, and the new creative director, Vince Laurent, had flown in from London with his entourage, all nerves and arrogance wrapped in expensive cologne. I'd stayed late every night aligning patterns, making sure every dart curved where a woman's body truly did. When Vince stormed in, he didn't look at the clothes. He looked at us. Models on the platform. Everyone else. Clear the mirror. He snapped. I held a half-finished muslin gown against the mannequin, adjusting a pleat. The model shifted uneasily. Vince turned, eyes narrowing. His smile was slow and poisonous. Fat pig. Move aside, you're blocking the mirror. The words sliced through the air, sharper than my shears. Cameras rolled a behind-the-scenes crew filming the magic of creation. No one moved. One assistant gasped, then bit her lip. The model looked away. Heat flooded my neck. I felt my pulse in my ears, the weight of every eye waiting to see me crack. I didn't. I simply folded the fabric, set it on the table, and closed my notebook. My fingers trembled only once, when I reached for my tailor's chalk. Vince laughed, the kind of laugh that told the room cruelty was a language he spoke fluently. I lifted my box of tools, the shears, the thread reels, the tiny mirror my mentor once gave me, and walked past him. The floorboards creaked under my steps. The camera followed, maybe hoping for a tear. I gave them nothing. When the elevator doors closed, I finally exhaled. The silk of my blouse clung to my skin, warm with humiliation. Outside, the winter air hit me like water, sharp and cleansing. By afternoon, HR would call me in, and by evening, I'd be carrying my life in a white cardboard box. By afternoon, my nameplate was gone from the atelier door. HR said it was a mutual decision, though I don't recall agreeing to anything. The woman assigned to escort me, Diana from Employee Relations, wore the kind of neutral smile they must teach in corporate seminars, empathetic, but not contagious. She avoided my eyes as she handed me the white cardboard box. Inside, I placed what was left of my world, my shears, heavy and silver, their handles worn smooth by years of use, my tailor's chalk in its little tin, 3 pattern notebooks, edges curled, pages smudged with pencil and fabric dust. And last, on top, the small hand mirror my mentor, Madame Corinne, had given me when I first joined Maison Vautrin. She'd said, "Never let them decide what beauty is. They'll change their minds every season." I looked down at the mirror now, its metal frame slightly tarnished, the glass marked by faint scratches, and thought how it had seen more truth than any of us. The elevator ride down was silent except for the hum of fluorescent light. Diana glanced at her tablet, pretending to check procedure. When the doors opened, the lobby's glass walls made everything look brighter, too clean. My reflection followed me across the marble floor, but it felt like a stranger's, smaller, blurred, unfinished. At the front desk, someone had already deactivated my badge. The security guard, an older man who'd once joked with me about football, gave a faint nod but didn't meet my gaze. The glass doors hissed open, and the winter light spilled in, white and merciless. Outside, I set the box on the edge of a planter to adjust my coat. The wind caught the tissue paper inside, lifting a scrap of muslin into the air. It twisted and danced before landing on the pavement, a ghost of what I'd made. I watched it for a long moment before picking it up and folding it carefully back into the box. Dignity, I thought, isn't something they can confiscate. It just becomes heavier to carry. I turned toward the street. My car was parked 3 blocks away, and by the time I reached it, the sun had already started to set. My phone vibrated once an unknown number, then another. I didn't answer. Not yet. The drive home felt endless. The city blurred past, a mix of headlights and glass, all of it distant. I kept both hands tight on the steering wheel, afraid that if I let go, the anger would spill out and drown me. I didn't cry. Not yet. I replayed his words again and again, fat pig. Not because I believed them, but because they had pierced something sacred, the quiet pride I'd built stitch by stitch. When I finally reached my apartment, I carried the white box to the kitchen counter. The air inside was still, the faint smell of lavender detergent lingering from laundry I'd folded that morning. Back when my job still existed, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it. Only then did the tears come hot, fast, unrestrained. They lasted less than a minute, but when they stopped, the silence that followed felt heavier than before. I made tea, though I didn't drink it. At 5 o'clock, my phone began to buzz, then again, and again. HR, PR, one of the assistants. I didn't answer, but I saw the pattern desperation. Something was wrong. Maison Vautrin's Paris show was scheduled in less than 12 hours, their most expensive, most public event of the year. In modern couture, every garment begins as a digital pattern, a precise coded blueprint stored in CAD software. But between those sterile computer lines and the living body stood me. I was the bridge, the translator of geometry into grace. Without my corrections, no dress ever truly fit. Now, it seemed, nothing fit. By 6, the messages turned frantic. Files don't match. Models can't walk. We can't find your final edits. Someone begged me to log in remotely, promising it wasn't about pride anymore, just survival. I turned my phone face down. The mirror on my wall caught my reflection tired, furious, steady. At 8, headlights swept across my window. I peered through the curtain. A black car idled by the curb. From it stepped Elise Garnier, the CEO herself, still wearing her silver gala dress. Her hair was undone, her face pale with panic. She looked up at my building as if praying I'd still be there. And for the first time that day, I let myself smile. Elise stood at my doorway, her breath visible in the cold air. The contrast between her sequined gown and the crumbling hallway was almost surreal. She looked like a woman who'd run straight from a ballroom into a storm and lost her way. "Alina," she said softly, "I need to speak with you. Please." I stepped aside. The apartment was small bolts of fabric stacked by the window, pattern papers spread across the table, a sewing machine humming faintly from when I'd last tested it. Elise took in the sight with the unease of someone unused to real workspaces. She didn't sit until I nodded. "Nothing fits," she admitted. "The models are threatening to walk. Paris is in the morning. And the dresses?" She broke off, pressing a trembling hand to her forehead. "It's chaos. The digital files are unreadable. The corrections don't align." I folded my arms. "Because they're not digital corrections. They're hand-drafted. Every season, I merged the CAD files with decades of handwritten adjustments, fit variations, legacy stitches, vintage cuts. Those notes live in my notebooks. Without them, the software sees only lines, not shape." Her gaze darted toward the white box on my counter. "The notebooks," she whispered. I let the silence stretch. The only sound was the ticking of my wall clock. Then Elise straightened her shoulders, switching back to corporate instinct. "I'll double your pay," she said. "Full reinstatement, public apology, whatever you want." I studied her face, the panic, the pride still clinging to her voice. "You can't buy back dignity," I said quietly. "You can only start respecting it." She looked away, her throat tightening. "Then, help us please. Tell me your terms." I opened one of the boxes stacked under my desk and pulled out a folder labeled Atelier Moreau Draft 1. The name had lived only in my head until that moment. "I'll help," I said. "But not as your employee. As a consultant, under my own name. and every stitch will carry my credit." Elise hesitated, then nodded. "Done." I set the kettle on the stove. "Then we begin now," I said, "because if we don't, Paris wakes up to ruin." By the time the chaos finally settled, the city was asleep. The last files had been uploaded, the final measurements corrected, and Elise had left my apartment with gratitude heavy in her eyes. I watched from the window as the black car disappeared down Rue Lambert, its taillights flickering red against the rain-slicked street. Inside, silence returned. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd eaten alone for years, only this time, the emptiness felt different, spacious, not hollow. My notebooks lay open, corners curling under the lamplight. The apartment still smelled faintly of coffee and silk dust. I drew out a clean sheet of pattern paper, the kind I used to reserve for the most important garments. Instead of drafting a sleeve or bodice, I began sketching something else a name, Atelier Moreau, a studio that would honor shape, not shame it, patterns designed for real women, not just the runway's narrow ghosts. I imagined soft lights, honest mirrors, clients laughing as they saw themselves reflected in clothes that finally fit their truth. For the first time in months, my pencil moved without hesitation. I reached for my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't dialed in years. Lucia Vega. Once one of Vautrin's most promising models, she'd been fired after refusing to starve herself to fit a sample gown I'd quietly hated. I still remembered her eyes that day, proud and defiant beneath humiliation. The call rang twice before a sleepy voice answered. "Alina, it's me," I said softly. "I'm starting something new, something honest, and I need someone who knows what it means to be told they're not enough and still show up anyway." Lucia was silent for a moment. Then, a slow, bright laugh broke through. "Tell me when and where." I smiled, glancing at the sketch before me, lines of possibility instead of pain. "Here," I said, "Rue Lambert. Midnight's not too late to begin." We talked until dawn, our words weaving a future between them, a small atelier born not from vengeance, but from the stubborn beauty of starting over. 4 days later, the call came. I was pinning a muslin dress on a mannequin when the ringtone cut through the hum of my sewing machine. The number flashed with a Paris code, for a heartbeat. I considered ignoring it. Then curiosity won. "Madame Moreau." The voice was tight, formal, Claire Dubois, head of communications at Maison Vautrin. "The collection is collapsing. The Paris show opens in 48 hours. We need you back. The files, the fittings, nothing aligns." I looked at the clock on the wall, then at the half-finished sketch beside it, the logo of Atelier Moreau, penciled with quiet certainty. "I'm available," I said, "but only through my firm. My rate is $500 an hour, full creative credit, written and public. I don't return as staff." There was a stunned pause, then a whisper of resignation. "Understood." 2 hours later, a car waited outside Rue Lambert. I packed my tools, the same ones that had been boxed up days before, and returned to the building that had thrown me out. The air inside the atelier was electric with panic. Rolls of fabric spilled across the floor. Assistants whispered near the racks, and in the center of it all stood Vince Laurent, pale as plaster. When he saw me, the color drained from his face. I set my box down. "We'll start over," I said evenly. "You'll follow my instructions exactly." No one argued. For the next 2 nights, I worked without rest. Stitch by stitch, I redrafted patterns, adjusted cuts, recalibrated digital files until fabric finally obeyed again. At dawn on the second day, the dresses began to move as they should alive. Fluid, precise. The evening of the show, I stood backstage as the first model stepped onto the runway. The lights hit her gown, and the audience gasped not at spectacle, but at truth. Every seam, Every curve carried the discipline of my hands. Applause built like a wave. Vince hovered nearby, speechless, clutching a glass of champagne he hadn't earned. Elise caught my eye across the room and gave a small, genuine nod. I slipped out before the final bow, walking into the cool Paris night. The noise faded behind me, replaced by the soft rhythm of my heels on the cobblestone. Dignity doesn't need an audience. It only needs a door that closes quietly behind you. 3 weeks later, the past came back to life pixel by pixel. Someone had leaked the behind-the-scenes footage from the final fitting. The clip opened with models laughing softly, assistants bustling, the hum of sewing machines, and then his voice, sharp and cruel. "Fat pig, move aside, you're blocking the mirror." It echoed across the internet like a wound torn open. Within hours, fashion forums ignited. Editors, stylists, even rival designers shared the clip, condemning Vince Laurent's creative cruelty. By midweek, his name trended alongside words like abuse and toxic leadership. Investors demanded his resignation before the Paris show even ended its run. I watched the storm from my small studio on Rue Lambert, the light of my laptop reflecting off the glass window. For a long while, I said nothing. I didn't feel triumph, just a quiet release, like air leaving a tightened seam. Atelier Moreau was growing faster than I dared to hope. Lucia and I had hired 4 seamstresses, all women over 40. Their hands moved slower than the interns I used to train, but their stitches were deliberate, steady, honest. Each one carried stories of being told they were too slow, too traditional, not modern enough. Here, those words had no meaning. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the window, I noticed an error in a client's gown, a subtle misalignment between the lining and outer silk, small but visible. My stomach clenched. The show in Milan was days away. I tore the piece from the mannequin, hands trembling. "How could I miss this?" I whispered. The familiar doubt pressed down again, heavy and cold. For a moment, I was back in that mirrored room, every mistake amplified by ridicule. Lucia appeared beside me, barefoot from the fitting area, her tone calm and grounded. "You rebuilt an empire once," she said. "You can fix a stitch." I laughed through my breath, shaky but real. Together, we worked in silence, thread through silk, stitch by stitch, until the fabric lay smooth again. When the gown was finished, I stepped back. The seam was invisible. Not perfect, just whole. And sometimes, that's stronger than perfection itself. The invitation arrived on a crisp ivory card sealed with Maison Vautrin's embossed crest. I almost mistook it for another press announcement until I saw the signature at the bottom, Elise Garnier. She wanted a meeting, not an apology, not a favor, a collaboration. The board, she said, was restructuring its creative direction and hoped I would return as creative consultant. Not an employee this time. My own name would appear beside theirs on every collection. I hesitated for a full day before answering. Then, on a gray morning, I found myself walking back through the same revolving doors that had once closed behind me like a verdict. The building smelled the same starch and ambition, but it no longer made my pulse race. I moved past the reception desk, past the glass elevator that had reflected my humiliation months ago, and followed Elise into the conference room. It was the same mirrored studio where Vince had laughed, where the word fat had hung like smoke in the air. But the mirrors had been polished, the lighting softened. Around the table sat board members, design leads, even the new HR director, all waiting in an awkward hush. Elise stood, composed but visibly moved. She reached into her leather portfolio and placed something on the table, a small hand mirror, its metal frame slightly tarnished, familiar enough to still sting. "I believe this belongs to you," she said. "You reminded us what beauty means and what it costs when we forget." For a moment, I could only look at it. The same mirror I'd carried out in that white box, the one my mentor had given me years ago. My reflection flickered across its surface. Steadier now, You don't owe me an apology, I said at last. Just promise no one in this room will ever feel that small again. Elise nodded. That's why you're here. We shook hands, firm, deliberate, equal. When the meeting ended, I lingered for a moment in front of the mirror. My reflection met my eyes without fear. The room that had once erased me now reflected me back whole. I slipped the mirror into my bag and walked out, not as their maker of patterns, but as the keeper of what they'd almost lost. A year later, Rue Lambert looked different. The old laundry sign above the door had been replaced by gold lettering that read, Atelier Moreau. Inside, the air buzzed with the soft rhythm of fabric being steamed, shoes clicking, cameras flashing. Tonight was our first show, our first real moment beneath the lights of Paris. I stood backstage, clipboard in hand, surrounded by laughter, chaos, and the smell of fresh silk. The models, our models, were women of every age, height, and curve. Some had gray in their hair, some stretch marks on their skin, all of them beautiful in ways no casting director had ever written down. Lucia, radiant and calm, helped a newcomer fasten the back of her gown. Breathe, she whispered. You belong here. Her words carried through the room like a quiet blessing. The orchestra began to play. The curtain lifted, one by one. The women stepped onto the runway. The audience leaned forward, not out of scrutiny, but awe. The gowns flowed effortlessly, each one tailored to movement rather than restraint. No corsets, no apology, just form meeting freedom. When Lucia appeared for the finale, the room went utterly still. Her gown, a cascade of ivory silk, caught the light like water. Across its train, embroidered in fine silver thread, were 4 words that shimmered as she walked, not a fat pig. The applause came in waves, rising until it filled the entire hall. Some in the front row stood, others wiped their eyes. A journalist near the stage whispered, "This is the most human fashion moment in a decade." I stayed behind the curtain, listening. It wasn't pride I felt, not exactly. It was peace, the kind that comes when a wound finally stops aching, when the last model stepped off stage. Lucia found me. "We did it," she said, her voice trembling. "No." I smiled. They did it. Back in the studio later that night, the mirror hung above my desk, the same one Elise had returned. I caught my reflection as I passed calm, steady, whole. For the first time, I didn't see the woman they once tried to shrink. I saw the woman who rebuilt herself to scale perfectly her own,